This is the Open University.
Hello, my little thunderstorms. I want to talk to you today about university because I've just reached the stage in my autobiography, my memoir, which is currently called Niche, because niche sounds a bit like Nick, and it's also the definition of my position as an artist throughout my career. I've been very niche. Niche is not necessarily a bad thing. It's a marketing term for a sort of prestige product, an intelligent product. And how did I get intelligent? One reason is that I went to university. And I've got up to the stage in this memoir where I'm describing that period of my life and realizing how important it was for me. I went into it rather reluctantly because I really wanted to go to art school. My big enthusiasms when I was a teenager in the late 70s were art and design, graphic design specifically, and industrial design. I wanted to make products. I was sort of excited by cars and things like that and wanted to be the person who hunched over the drawing board and made exciting new car designs or Hoovers or, hi-fis or kettles or whatever. There was this weird kind of fetish for industrial design. I wanted to be the next Johnny Ive, or the first Johnny Ive, since he wasn't around then. I think he's about the same age as me, actually. So I had a funky aunt who's actually the mother of Justin Curry, my pop star cousin. She's my Aunt Barbara, and she was much more encouraging to me to go to art college than my parents were. I didn't really hear much from my parents about anything except university. I suppose ideally they wanted me to go to Cambridge, because they hadn't done that. They'd been to Scottish universities, Glasgow and Edinburgh. But when I failed to do that, I got Scottish Highers, as they were called then, which were the equivalent of A-levels. So it was enough to get into a Scottish university. I think Edinburgh University rejected me because I didn't have a German exam for some reason to do an English course. That was a bit weird. I was studying German at school, but I hadn't passed an O-level or A-level. But yeah, my Aunt Barbara, I went through to Glasgow and saw her, and she had all the prospectuses from the art schools because she was a librarian at the time, and I picked out the Central School of Art and Design, Central St Martin's as it now is, CSM, and or London University of the Arts, I think it's the umbrella term is. And I was all ready to go there, and I think I probably would have switched to fine art painting, after my foundation year. I think I would have really more gravitated to being an actual artist, a visual artist, and that would have been fascinating. What kind of artist would I have been? What kind of work would I have made? But I kind of bottled it because I was scared of going to London. I was frightened of that prospect. I was a virgin. I was 18 years old. I'd lived in Athens, Montreal, and Edinburgh, but London somehow frightened me. It was a punky time. It wouldn't have been very exciting, actually. It would have been a totally different sort of life trajectory. But I went instead, because Edinburgh had rejected me, I went to Aberdeen University, which is up north. It's the most northerly campus. It's a bit like the weather is now here in Berlin. The sun sort of rises and says, nah, fuck this, and goes back down under the horizon again. And the wind is always blowing. Every time you come to a corner, especially when there's a big tower block or something, this biting, icy wind hits you in the face. I had a big Chinese coat, which my mother had brought back from a trip to China. We had a successful language college at the time, teaching foreign students English. So my mother had been sent out partly as a ploy to get her out of the country so my dad could have an affair with his secretary, but that's another matter. She'd been sent to Japan and China, and she brought back from China a large military overcoat, which was very thickly padded and looked very Maoist intellectual, in fact. So I walked around with my DMs with the thick rubber soles and this big Chinese military coat. I'd been given a company car, the use of a company car, which was this old banger, a Wolseley 1300 in Trafalgar blue. So I drove that up and down between Edinburgh and Aberdeen, and the first 2 years I was in Hillhead Halls of Residence, which is this sort of, I always thought of it as a sort of African missionary station or a Siberian research lab in the tundra, something very windswept, but also beautiful trees, and then this slope down to the Don River. And you could walk through this park called Seton Park, past an old cathedral called the Macher Cathedral, to the King's Campus, which is a very beautiful campus with classic medieval university buildings, libraries. So actually, I've been, for the last 3 days here in Berlin, I've been actually attending a sort of seminar art conference thing, which is called, at the Haus der Kultur und der Welt, it's called The New Alphabet. And it took on a huge variety of themes about, the contemporary condition and research into algorithms, machine learning, all sorts of the development of new alphabets, and also historic approaches to old alphabets, how people transcribed music in the Middle Ages, or how Cyrillic was Romanized in Russia, So all sorts of, or African fabrics as a kind of language of form, a lot of, like a conference with this amazing scope. And so I'm reviewing that for Art Agenda, which is an eFlux publication. And I haven't written the review yet, but it felt very much like 3 days of being back at university. In a nice way, it reminded me, having this place to go, the Haus der Kultur und der Welt, which is this fantastic clamshell building, sort of Cold War era, prestige, the West Berlin showing that it had enlightened cultural institutions. So now it really stands out, not in the context of, we've got to beat the Soviets to look more advanced than them, but we've got to beat the populists to look more enlightened than them. We've got to think about the positive values that we can embrace about the future, in the kind of context of there wasn't much explicit reference in the talks and seminars to populism, a few bits here and there. But this was very much a dark backdrop, a de-enlightenment, an endarkenment, I think somebody's called it. We're living through an era called the endarkenment, which is a sort of reversal of Enlightenment values. What it really brought home to me, though, was that progress is still progress. We are still there are incredible technological advances. Globalization is here to stay, and that the sort of reaction against it we're seeing now is a local historical phenomenon. You can't stop globalization. You can't really stop the interconnectedness and the networking that we have now on a global level. The implication everybody's economy has with everybody else's is here to stay. So all we're seeing is a kind of stubborn, backward, kind of a backlash, really, which is, I think it's destined to peter out fairly soon. That was the optimistic takeaway for me, anyway. Although it seems very fashionable just now to be anti-global, whatever, I don't think it can last. I think that, we have... Anyway, it reminded me, getting back to my topic of the university, it reminded me of a kind of the best aspects of a university, which is that there's a big lecture theatre, which reminded me of the Arts Lecture Theatre in Aberdeen, where I would go in my first year in 1978, go every day for lectures in English, lectures in psychology. I was doing sociology, psychology, and English in my first year. Also linguistics, but I dropped out of linguistics because I really didn't get on with it. Something offended me about linguistics, which was that language was being treated as a machine, or even as a logical system, when I didn't think it was logical. You have to retrospectively write rules for the way people use language. And the English language is particularly illogical, actually, in the way it spells through and all the rest of it. It doesn't make any sense. But I hated it was like becoming a gynecologist when you wanted to actually just have sexual intercourse. I wanted to use the language expressively. And so I joined the creative writing group, and I spent a lot of... And there were people like Ali Smith, in the creative writing group, or Ian Stephen. These are actually really great writers who've come to some prominence, along with myself. I've kind of felt... And also I met my first lover in the creative writing group, having failed to get off with my Beatrice, my Paula, who was an art student in Glasgow at the time. I did meet someone and actually managed to have sex for the first time at the age of 21, the ripe old age. But I was also thinking of the university as a resource. What I have to bracket all this with is that I was, this was being paid for by the state. this was a way, in the wonderful old socialist days of Britain, when the state did pay for more than it does now. It was a much bigger state. Also, not fewer people went to university. I think only 10% of people or something went to university in those days, whereas now it's about 48% or 50%. Getting higher education, and also, running up loans and things. It's a horribly privatized system now. The government paid almost all of my fees, and then there was a thing called parental contribution, which was actually measured on my mother's income rather than my father's, just so that I would get more from the state. So, because my parents were separating and divorcing at the time. So it was a good time to get away from Edinburgh, to let that kind of disastrous situation unfold, their marriage breaking up. But it was also intellectually an amazing time of expansion for me. I have to say that when I look at my diaries, between the age of 18 and 24, because it was really a 6-year period, I graduated when I was 24 in 1984, having taken 2 years out in the middle of the course to do music. And expressiveness really became more and more central to me. It really, to become a writer or a musician became the goal, and that's what I ended up doing. But I did really appreciate the possibility of an expansive universe, an intellectual universe, where you could go up to the library. I could drive my little Wolseley down from the halls of residence to the Queen Mother Library, which was then the new library. Now there's an even flashier new library with a cafe on the ground floor and this amazing architecture at Aberdeen, right next to where the Queen Mother Library used to be. But I would just immerse myself in if I was feeling a bit low, I'd go to the creativity section, and actually that's my way to validate myself, that, my differences, my sort of quirky, autistic, antisocial side could be validated by things I was reading about psychometric studies of what creative people are like. Creative people have an internal locus of evaluation, and that means that they don't actually give a damn what other people think. Or I could be reading, Robert Lowell's poems or Auden's plays or whatever. I also met a really good friend, met someone who became a very good friend, who's a communist Greek guy who'd been brought up in Italy called Babis. So I've been writing about how he would bring me to Italy each year, each summer. And that was really a vision of my future, that I wanted to be a Euro-communist. I wanted to be European, and I wanted to be in Rome going to John Cage concerts. That was really an amazing breakthrough for me, that we would go and we'd see David Tudor sticking a piezo mic in the back of a piano in the open air under the stars, under the Palatine Hill, or in a courtyard. We'd see a performance of Daughters of the Lonesome Isle, again by John Cage. Prepared piano piece for 2 prepared pianos, and I would just sit there thinking, Jesus, I'm here, I'm in Rome, I'm with European people. There was a French girl, who later became my girlfriend as well, actually, who was at that point his girlfriend. And so this was, you can see the beginnings of the narratives on the Beast with Three Backs, the threesome narratives starting there. But it was just very exciting for me to be in a bunch of European people, to be a European. I was the Scot, he was the Greek, she was French, and there were various other people there. He'd been educated at an English language school in Rome, St. George's, and he knew these weird eccentrics, like a guy called Mr. Buckley, who was like a sort of avant-garde music guy attached to the British Council in Rome. So I kind of felt at home, because my dad had been with the British Council in Athens, and then we'd all be back in Aberdeen again, and sort of having these discussions about Gramsci and Adorno and Stalin and stuff like that. We'd sit around and be kind of Euro-communists together. But also I had a group of friends who were art students who were at Gray's College of Art, and they became really important too. I met them because they wanted to make a film with the University Film and Television Society, which is called Phoenix. And we did start making a film, which was kind of based on a script of mine. It didn't really ever get finished, though. But it was great a pretext, really, for us to walk around and say, listen, we're looking, to look at Aberdeen as a series of possible cadrage, possible framings for a sort of avant-garde video production we were going to make. So, the kind of pretentious stuff that students do, or writing for the student paper, Gaudi. I was the reviewer, of course, for films and for rock concerts, so I'd review magazine and people like that. when they came on the second-hand daylight tour, and played in our little gymnasium in the student, the SRC building at Marshall College. So it was kind of, and I think I've got this sort of taste for austerity because Aberdeen was a very austere city, windswept with seagulls and a salty smell in the air. Of course, there was oil money coming in, and there were sort of exclusive shops here and there. There were a lot of record shops. That's another thing to remember about the late 70s. The indie record shops everywhere. Just amazing that pretty much any street had an indie record shop with releases from the Cartel, Rough Trades distribution, and you could buy amazingly. I could buy Passage albums. They would be displayed in the window of some record shop in central Aberdeen. There was the other record shop, which I guess was the main one we went to I would get my cluster records and things from there. These kind of culture shops, which don't really exist anymore, and which their absence really marks a certain moment of boredom for me in cities in terms of actually going shopping in the city centre. Okay, there's still clothes shops, there's shoe shops. There aren't really these culture shops anymore. The bookshops and the record shops have struggled, obviously, in the face of Amazon and in the face of iTunes. So that's how I remember Aberdeen. It's really weird to go back there. I didn't go back until 2009 when I was up in the Shetlands, the Orkney and Shetland with my mother, and we came back via Aberdeen, and I went to Gray's School of Art, where my friend at the time, Keith Grant, is now a teacher there, a painting teacher. Me and Keith used to hang out and talk about painting, about Philip Guston and Chaim Soutine and all these painters that he was into. He really educated me a lot about painting. And so I could also have this fantasy of being either a filmmaker or a painter. Or this is the thing, you're kind of rehearsing a lot of possibilities for a lot of parallel words you're going to have later in your life, potentially. Of course, you can't live them all. I've been incredibly lucky that I've lived out a lot of my fantasies. I could pretend I was David Bowie and make a lot of pop records. I could pretend I was Kafka and write a lot of novels and books and things, and I'm still kind of doing that. Although if I were really Kafka, I'd be dead. I would have been dead by now for 15 years or something. But I kind of am very grateful for that, and it is fascinating to think what would have happened if I had gone to art college. I would have met probably really a different bunch of interesting people. As it was, I was kind of a friend of Ali Smith, and I was kind of chasing Ali Smith, not realizing her orientation at the time, in a sort of futile way that I would get sort of obsessed with people, and I would pay her parking tickets. She had a little Citroën de Chevaux. And if ever I saw a parking ticket on it, I'd rip it off and go and pay it at the office without telling. I told her years later, but so it was. It was good also to have a different city to go to. Aberdeen being, but yeah, I suppose that is the main memory I got, the trigger I got going to the Huis de Cultuur en de Welt. Huis de Cultuur en de Welt has a library, it has auditoria, it has events, has music. I mean, I joined up, and in the first week at Aberdeen, I joined up with the Film Society, the newspaper. I was pretty clear that I was an arts reviewer, or that was kind of my identity at the time, was that I was interested in the arts and I wanted to do arty things, and hung out with painters like Callum Innes, who's now quite a famous abstract painter, was there in Hill Head, painting in his little bedsit. That's another thing I've been describing in the book, is how when you get allocated a little bedroom. In Hill Head, I was in Esselmont House, 103 Esselmont House. That was a tiny little room with an orange bedspread on a bed, a wardrobe, a desk, an Anglepoise lamp, a little notice board, and I brought up a stereo system and guitar. But I was sort of describing in the book what I had on the walls. I had sort of a Kirchner postcard and a little Kafka story underneath, one of Kafka's meditations. And I had sort of Polish theatre, pictures from a review called Gambit, which John Calder put out, of Thaddeus Cantor's production, The Dead Class. So this was my pretentious way to start with something very minimal and very basic, and just a space for living, a little machine for living. You had 6 of these little rooms organised around a kitchen and a bathroom, which was communal. And I was friends with a Roxy Music fan, a sort of slightly tense friendship. But I did go down and visit his family in England. This idea of really starting again with an empty space, the absolute bare minimum, living requirements, the existence minimum, and then defining yourself culturally by just sticking up a couple of pictures or playing music, playing discrete music by Eno, and then you sort of take over the space. Of course, you have to battle with the guy across the corridor who's playing Hall & Oates, and the guy down the corridor who's playing Genesis, and then the guy across there who's playing Blondie. That was what it was like. You really had to, everyone had to define their space with music, but also visually. And I was keeping diaries. That was super important as well, that I would expand in a pretentious way. I completely admit that it was pretentious, and I admit it without shame, because, I'm with Bowie and Eno in saying that it's fine to make a whole new school of pretension and to be pretentious. To be pretentious is simply to aspire and to aim for something that maybe you're not quite at yet, but you will reach, you can reach. So I was pretentiously expanding my diaries. They kept getting bigger and bigger, more and more rambling, more and more aesthetic, until I got to the stage where I couldn't really stand writing anymore, and I wanted just to sing. So that's when I founded my band, The Happy Family, and that would be the next chapter of the book. I just was remembering how great it was to have an institution in which to be pretentious and in which to find a self to become. And the university had enough resources there. It had little pretend, a bit like the music industry as well. The music industry had little machines for fame, which were the music papers, 3 of them coming out each week. Another thing that's disappeared entirely now with the death of the NME, that was the last of the weekly music papers. Music papers were a critical factory, a fame factory, a fame laboratory, which each week would boost certain talents who were, they were poets, a lot of them, they were singers, they were people in bands, they were punks. It was Richard Hell and the Voidoids, or it was Paul Weller, whoever it was they were talking about, John Lydon in Public Image Limited. It was people who were essentially artists and poets, and they would be striking poses in dramatic photographs on the cover of these papers. And in a way it would be like a little Monopoly money version of a real cultural critique, a real world of artists, a bit like, not so different from, the Surrealists and their little reviews and, poetry magazines run by Ezra Pound, whatever. I didn't see an essential difference. There was a kind of desire to embrace modernism as well. Modernism was only just kind of reaching the music world, and people like Kraftwerk were also looking at modernism with a winking kind of humour in a postmodern way. So that was the beginnings of postmodernism as well, culturally speaking, and a playfulness and a retro kind of concern, and a collapse of high and low, serious and playful, all the rest of it. So it was a wonderful time to be young, and I don't regret at all having gone to university. I don't feel. It meant that when I did eventually hit the music scene, I was already in my mid-20s. I'd kind of wasted a lot of time, but that time was not wasted. That was a fantastic time for me, a fantastic opportunity to expand intellectually, which I really did. I really became less stupid, and I do feel. Sounds kind of terrible, but I do feel that the world is menaced by stupidity right now. And we also have a kind of civil war situation with Brexit and all the rest of it, and Trumpism. We have a kind of civil war between the intelligent people and the stupid people, which is very unfortunate for the stupid people, because they are going to lose it. By definition, if you're that stupid, you can't win in a complex modern world. But it is basically the kind of conflict that you saw in the American Civil War between the South and the North. And the South lost because they were not as smart as the North, technologically, in terms of creativity, in terms of administration of their lives. And kind of the same thing with Pol Pot in Cambodia, or the Cultural Revolution in China. You can't win when you pit stupid people against intelligent people. Intelligent people will win. And this is the defining thing about Brexit for me, is that it is, you look at all the studies and all the stats, it is actually, people with college degrees like me are all Remainers, and everybody, people who can't distinguish between their personal pronoun and their verb, can't spell, for instance, are always Brexiteers. I'm sorry, but that is the case. Just look at all the comments in the newspapers and you'll find all the Leavers can't spell. and can't punctuate and don't know about grammar. It is very, very highly correlated with education. I've read that it's like 70% or more correlated to whether you have a further education degree. So university, it was super important for me, and it's still super important in that it's defining Brexit. It's the smarty pants graduates who are all wanting to stay with the European Union. Anyway, that's my thought for the day. Thinking about how university formed me and made me the unbearable lecturer who you're watching in these broadcasts.